Gregory.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for your kindness and generosity, uh, and your support for the Spanish community.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
wanted to see if you could kindly mention the Eight Noble Paths.
Mm-hmm. You mean to describe it, the path
Thank
factors?
you.
Yeah. That's what I was doing just at the end there, but I'll go through them quickly so that it's more clear. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi, or calm stillness, concentration. Those are the 8 path factors. And what's important, if we really want to apply those to all moments of our lives and all circumstances, it's important to ask what each of those means, what each path factor means, if when we're done, it covers all of our lives with nothing left out. So, for example, think of it from the backwards side. What covers my time doing email, right? Because it's not mentioned in the suttas. Well, the easy answer is right speech, right? Because we're using language. And obviously, what's also active when you write an email is how you see the world, what's important to you. So, right view is operating, or wrong view. And of course, it has an intention. So, right intention, or you could be practicing developing the intentions of compassion, of letting go, relinquishment, and so on. What about the climate change? Where does that come in? How I use or waste water and other natural resources, and that's under, at least where I view this, is under the movement of resources of right livelihood. That what money comes in. Money is just a condensed energy, right? And so how I spend money is a moral choice. When if you look at anybody's credit card statement, that is a moral document. Every expenditure says something about your values. So if I am a monastic, I have a lot of guidance that was given to me by the Buddha on my requisites, my clothing, my housing, my food, and my medicine. But as lay people, we have to find that for ourselves. So you can use the same framework if you like. Your housing, how does it stand in terms of climate change, in terms of greed, in terms of delusion? Your clothing and the self-making, the self-expression through clothing and identity is a very interesting question, right? So that would be both right effort to abandon the unwholesome and cultivate the wholesome, but it's also a movement of resources. How much do I spend? Is it wise? Is it good for the world? Is it good for my mind? And so on. How about the work, the other things in your life that you care about, your family or your arts? If you're an artist, a dancer, a musician, how does that fit in? All of these things, you want to look at the Eightfold Path with an understanding that the path is always active. What guidance can I gain you know, from the path in all of these areas of my life. And that's what I obviously try to do in the Whole Life Path book that I wrote. And it's an ongoing project for all of us. So there's the Eightfold Path.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And I also want to say that you thanked me for my generosity, with supporting the Spanish-speaking community. I am so touched by this first simultaneous translation of this work and the sharing of it with a wider Spanish-speaking community. It's been an aspiration that I've had, was supported, I think it was mentioned to you at the beginning of this, by Delia and Roberto Surya, who are longtime Insight Dialogue students and practitioners. So I'm very moved by this and feel a lot of joy.
Thank you, Gregory. I have two questions from the Spanish-speaking community.
Okay, thank you.
In the chat. So the first one is, where do we start practicing? Where do we start with this practice?
Beautiful, yeah. Sorry to be a little bit silly, but anywhere, like now, recognize where the path is already active for you. Because it is, for sure. You're here, what's happening now? And if you know, this is, as I said, a practice of right view, right? That we're engaged in. How wonderful. We're already practicing right view. How's my mindfulness? So we're assessing. We do what I call a path factor inventory. And we just say, how is each path factor alive in my life now? And we say, this is important. This is very practical advice. You say, let's say you find that there's an area that needs more work. Like you're not so great at right speech. You tend to yell or swear or something. So just start there. Or let's say you're kind of, maybe a little selfish. So just start there and say that would be right effort to abandon the unwholesome, cultivate the wholesome, be more giving, be more considerate in thinking of other people. It's very human. It's very direct. Now, if you are inspired by a certain aspect of the path, start there. A lot of people have been very inspired by mindfulness. So practice more mindfulness, formally, informally, or whatever. And there's many ways to practice in addition to formal meditation. Or maybe you have no idea what it might mean to practice right intention. Well, do a little reading, a little bit of thinking, and then, say, how could I do this? Or maybe there's an area that's really strong for you. Like, when I will not kill, I will not steal, I don't lie, I act in sexually appropriate ways. You know that right action in that sense of classical morality is something you really care about. Then think about that, feel joy in it, and develop it further, because that's already alive in you. So whether you start somewhere weak or somewhere strong, somewhere that really interests you, or something that's kind of been vague for you, not clear, it's all workable. The biggest point is do it. That's the biggest part right there. The zeal, the energy, the inspiration.
Thank you. The second question that I had, it's also how can I practice in my daily life and in difficult situations where I can't find any peace and I think things are unjust?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. You know, that kind of situation is exactly where the very strong, good, profound work of diminishing the grip of habits of self happens. It's not easy, but we need to start by remembering the path will not always look peaceful. There are times when the mind is agitated. If you know the mind is agitated, that's mindfulness. That's path. You're practicing right mindfulness, and you are not then in that moment of mindfulness, you're not feeding the same habit, blindness. You know that it's painful. You know you might be unskillful, and you're going to be careful. So one thing to do there is to think about non-harm. I don't want, I'm agitated. I see injustice. I don't want to add to the harm. I don't want to be adding hatred, rough speech, anger to this situation. And that then begins to say, oh, okay, so I'm going to stay with my mindfulness. I'm not going to look away from the injustice. I'm not going to shut off. I'm going to let it in, but I'm going to not add to the harm. I'm going to stay with mindfulness as best I can. And now we say, what's behind this feeling of anger? And we see that the injustice is because we care. We care about the injustice. There's compassion there. And recognize that compassion, feel it, that the injustice is not okay. And now how you act, of course, will depend upon the circumstances and what resources you have, what time you have, your position in society. Lots of things affect the actual actions you can take. But the path is the entire setup. And then finally, I'll say, turn to your spiritual friends. Join with others in facing what's difficult and in being with it, with a commitment to each other, to this, the wise intention of compassion and non-harm. It's not easy, though, so I really appreciate your work deeply. Harika.
Yes, that's me. Hello, good afternoon, good evening. I just wanted to thank you again, Gregory, and everyone, because it's thanks to Venerable Vimala and Tilorien Monastery that I had the luck to listen to your workshop on the Noble Eightfold Path. And after that, I joined the weekly Inside Dialogue practice group. We have the Dhamma Contemplation with Lou and all this. So yeah, I just want to thank you for giving us this support in this very challenging year. So thank you for your wisdom and generosity. My question has more to do with time, since we are talking about birth, death, and this thing in between that already seems quite short. How to be present in the teaching, how to be present in our path while still having this need for faith, like we are heading towards something. So there is a natural inclination to project ourselves. So how to not fall in this kind of trick of when the conditions will be perfect, when I will have the perfect job, then I will practice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not just feeling stuck, because sometimes you don't even know if you are making progress and even walking down the past. So, how
Mm.
to not get attached either to past, future, but still have this kind of push
Beautiful.
to keep on going.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a funny thing being human, isn't it? And having a mind that builds a future and builds a past. And here we are right now is the only moment that we can make any decisions. We can't change the past. The future's not here yet. And here we are in this. And yet the mind is built to anticipate. I mean, that's how we survive. If I go over there, I will get eaten by a tiger. We figure that out. And if we couldn't figure it out, we would have already been killed, and this part of our tendency wouldn't exist. Genetically, it wouldn't move forward. So we're built to do that anticipating. But this is where the practice of right intention comes in. Because what intention, the teaching on intention is, like I said, it's the intuitive direction of the heart. It's the aiming of the mind based on how we see the world, right? So that makes no sense if there's no future. The path factor of right intention presumes a future. Okay? So that means that right in the heart of the teachings on the Noble Eightfold Path is this sense of possibility and our intentional movement in that wholesome direction. So, how do we do that skillfully, though, right? First of all, the rational thinking mind that thinks it knows the right answers and where things are going is always partial. It never gets it. The way we think things are going to be, the way we think things are, like this practice of mindfulness. Do you really think you know your own mind and what it's doing? Even in your very best moments of mindfulness? I don't think so. What you get is just a shimmering, just a thin, thin layer of what you can see. It's ridiculous almost, and intention is the same way. It's like we can think we know where we're going or something like that, but it's a mystery. The mind is a mystery. The heart is a mystery. How we relate is a mystery. The complexity of this life is quite stunning. So there's a kind of, I'm inviting you to touch into the intuitive sense of the movement of your life, of your heart, where you feel called. And don't worry that your heart has a longing for, let's say, greater kindness and freedom. That's a wholesome longing, And when you arrive at various moments where past and future really are completely gone, they've vanished, and it's only this, enjoy it. It's good. That's also good. But that's not the only way of living. We can't live only like that. It's not possible, right? So we live in this body. The body always is going to want some safety and so on, and so on and so forth. So I would say that turn to that intuitive sense of direction and don't worry about what the mind thinks is coming up. But it's a beautiful question. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And our last question with Isa, I'm not sure the name. Sisa?
Isa, Yeah. Thank you so much. It's really, really good to listen to you, and it's really, really beneficial. My question is more addressed to your thoughts or your feelings about the situation we are living at this time, especially with the climate change and the injustices and everything. In the spiritual world, in practical terms, do you see anything, or is there anything happening in terms of reunions of forces or between different communities that you can, if there's any more dialogue that you've seen happening to kind of help things get better? Do you see that there's more movements? Basically, what's your take on this? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Isa. It's a good question to close with. It's a very powerful, important question. The answer is yes. I do see what you were calling dialogues. I'll say a integration of visions of the nature of the path and the nature of the work that we're all doing together in this life, in this world. And I touched on it when I was giving this talk just a moment ago. And I'll remind you of when I was pointing out the kind of the penetrating of ignorance that can happen in the refinement of meditative insight. And in fact, it ties in with the questions that we had just a moment ago. So that seeing through, that vanquishing, dissolving of ignorance that is possible with the refinement of the mind is part of the path, an important part of the path. And what I was calling this effacement, this erosion of self, calls us to the earthiness, the deep humanity that each of us carries in our care for each other. Because as long as we're selfish, as long as we're tied up in I, in me, in mine, in my views, in my pleasures, and even in my fears, as long as it's all tied up in that ball, then injustice and climate change and so on will not matter to me. And I will act in ways that are harmful. And this is important, I will not act in ways that are beneficial for others, the active life for social and climate justice. I won't do, because it's, right? So as this path of what I think of as human goodness ripens, there is no separation between the path of ripening my selflessness and care and compassion locally and globally. So if I really see and care about and am touched by the world, then that's not going to stop at the border of just my family, let's say. My heart opens, and it opens to those who are hurting. And I act on that. So I feel like that's the doorway from the Buddhist aspect, the Buddhist teachings, for the integration of the work and the thinking and the activities of social and climate and other forms of justice and equity. Now, the specifics, you see, it wasn't like the Buddha provided all the answers for how to actually do social justice or climate work. So there must be an integration in a worldly sense of how to go about that. the idea that Buddhism would have the answers of how to specifically do these things, it would be a ridiculous and arrogant stance. But I'm not aware of any Buddhists that really have that, right? So, on the other hand, if people who are doing racial justice work or climate work believe that only that work, is important only on its own terms and doesn't need the wisdom from underneath, that's another kind of arrogance. So the interchange calls us to a kind of maturity, to not being attached to one way of seeing how those things unfold. And there's a tremendous value in both, in what I'm calling the whole life path. I don't think you can leave any of it out. So thank you for that question. It's a good way to stop. And as we do close, as at least my part is closing, I'm not sure about the rest of the event. Maybe our hosts could tell me if I would like to take a moment for sharing of merit. May I do that? I don't even know who I'm asking. There's all these.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, yeah. So this question that Isa just asked, it calls us to really see how we're located in the world and not separate from it, touched by it. And also to not deny the beauty of a path that of awakening that holds something of astonishing power and beauty. That our potential for awakening that's here in this very mind, in this very life, can inform every moment of our lives. And that to know this and to work with this and to have spiritual friends and community is an enormous privilege. It's a beautiful thing. And so we open our hearts to remember the beings who are suffering, who don't have the safety, the guaranteed food, housing. And that's how they've, while we've been doing this, they've been working on their survival, yeah? And there are people who are very privileged, but who have no idea of the suffering that they're experiencing in all their privilege. And so our hearts go out to them as well. May those who are experiencing greed and hatred, may they be free from that. Those who are experiencing loss and fear, death, illness, may they be free from all suffering. May all beings, without exception, every human being, every animal, every bird, every reptile, every creature, be free from suffering. May they be free. May all beings, without exception, share in the merits of our practice together. Everything that we've done throughout this Vesak day, may it benefit all beings, without exception. May there be peace. May there be peace. May there be peace.